Under a sky the color of cooling embers, the westbound train sighed to a stop at the little station where the prairie grasses bowed in the evening wind. Dust swirled around boots and hooves, catching the last fire of the sunset, and the smell of iron and coal hung in the still air. Silas Whitlock sat tall in the saddle, his horse shifting restlessly beneath him, ears flicking at the hiss of steam. The cowboy had ridden many trails, driven cattle across dry lands and slept under moons that seemed to follow him with silent judgment, but he had never carried more loneliness than he did on this night. 30 years had left his face bronzed and strong, yet behind his steady gaze lived the quiet ache of a man who had no hand to hold when the fire dwindled low. He had not come for anything more than supplies, perhaps a wordless nod from the station master, perhaps to watch the horizon swallow the train whole. Yet as the crowd scattered and trunks were lifted and voices called out names, he noticed her. She did not move with the others, did not step forward into eager arms. Ayanna stood still as a cedar rooted deep, her long braid glistening black against the pale linen of her dress. She was young, no more than 20, but her eyes carried an old watchfulness, as if she had measured storms before she had ever learned laughter. Around her the air seemed different, the murmurs of travelers bending away from her, leaving her untouched yet exposed. Silas's chest tightened, though he could not name why. He had seen women before, saloon girls with painted lips, ranch wives bustling with children, widows whose sorrow turned sharp, but none like her. She looked not lost but set apart, as though the world had chosen not to claim her. A trunk sat unopened at her side, dust already gathering on its brass lock. The station master avoided her glance, turning instead to polish his spectacles though the glass was already clean. Ayanna's gaze never lowered, yet the silence around her grew heavier with every passing second. Silas wondered if anyone would step forward, if anyone waited for her down the road. When no one did, curiosity burrowed into him like a thorn. Who was she, and what story had brought her to stand alone in a place built for departures? The crowd thinned. Ayanna remained. The last of the light stretched long across the ground, and Silas felt the moment draw tight like reins in his hands. He dismounted, his boots striking the boards with quiet finality. She looked at him then, not pleading, not fearful, but with a steadiness that struck something unguarded inside him. He had no words prepared, no clever explanation for what moved him. He only knew that loneliness had stared at him too long, and here was someone who seemed carved from the same silence. "You're coming with me," he said, voice low, roughened by years of wind and whiskey. The words surprised even him, yet they left no space for retreat. Around them whispers rose, sharp-edged, disbelieving. The station master stiffened. A woman collecting her parcels clutched them closer, eyes narrowing. To take her was to invite every tongue in town to wag, every lawman's eye to linger. Silas knew this, but the truth beat louder in his chest. He could not leave her to the shadows. Ayanna studied him, her expression unreadable. She did not answer, yet she did not turn away. After a heartbeat, she lifted her trunk with her own hands, refusing his gesture to carry it, and followed as he led his horse from the station. The murmurs trailed after them like dust in the wind. The ride into the prairie stretched long and wordless. The land unfolded in endless copper and gold, the horizon bleeding into stars. Silas kept his eyes forward, every so often stealing a glance at the figure riding behind him. She sat the saddle as if born to it, her spine unbending, her face calm. Her silence was not submission but its own language, one he did not yet know how to read. The air between them carried a weight he could not shake, guilt, perhaps, for speaking without asking, or perhaps a strange relief, as though fate had answered a prayer he had never spoken aloud. The night deepened. Coyotes called from the distance, and the smell of sagebrush thickened. Silas's cabin came into view, a squat wooden shape against the vast dark. He slowed his horse, listening for any sound from her. None came. He wondered if she judged him, if she wondered what kind of man would claim a stranger with so few words. Shame brushed against him, sharp and sudden. He wanted to tell her he was no outlaw, no thief of women, only a man worn thin by years of silence. But he stayed quiet, letting the night carry what he could not say. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled to life, throwing shadows across the rough-hewn walls. Silas set food on the table, bread, beans, water drawn from the well, and motioned for her to take the bed. She shook her head once, firm, and laid her blanket by the far wall instead. He did not press her. Instead, he stretched by the fire, hat tilted over his eyes, listening to the small sounds of her moving in the dark. Every creak of wood, every shift of fabric, seemed louder than it should. He closed his eyes but did not sleep. Morning came pale and cool. Silas woke to find her gone from the cabin, though her blanket remained. A pulse of panic jolted through him until he saw her outside, standing by the corral watching the horses. The sun touched her face, softening the sternness of her expression, and for a fleeting moment he saw youth where before he had seen only resilience. He stepped outside, boots crunching on the dirt, but she did not turn. He wondered if she would stay another day, if the horizon would call her away before he found the courage to speak more than a handful of words. As the days edged forward, small gestures began to bloom between them, fragile as desert flowers. He found water already drawn when he came from the fields. She left herbs drying by the window where sunlight pooled. Once he caught her laughing softly at a foal that nipped its mother's tail, and the sound startled him more than gunfire ever had. He began to notice the grace of her movements, the steadiness with which she carried herself, and beneath his weathered chest something long buried stirred awake. The town noticed too. Whispers followed them when he rode in for feed, when she stepped beside him to choose cloth from the mercantile. Sheriff Doolan's eyes lingered with caution. Martha Kincaid's tongue wagged behind curtained windows. Words like foolish, sinful, unnatural curled through the streets. Silas bore them in silence, though each one felt like a stone added to his back. Yet when he looked at Ayanna and saw her chin held high, her gaze unwavering, he found strength to stand straighter. In the quiet of their evenings she began to sing, low and lilting, words in a tongue he did not understand but felt in his bones. The cabin seemed to change with it, no longer a hollow refuge but a place where life unfurled. Silas felt himself softening, not weakened but steadied, as though he had finally found the ground he had always searched for. One morning as dawn spilled gold across the fields, he stood before her with a simple band he had carried for years, once meant for a promise broken long ago. His hand trembled but his voice held steady. He did not speak of forever, nor did he weave declarations. He only offered what he had: a life, a home, a heart slowly learning how to be open. She looked at him for a long breath, then placed her hand in his. The whisper that left her lips was small, but it was assent. They stood beneath the sky, no priest or crowd to witness, only the wind and the earth. And in that quiet, their bond sealed itself not with grandeur but with dignity. The loneliness that had once bound them both slipped away like a shadow at dawn, leaving in its place something stronger: belonging. If you ever find yourself standing at a station with no one waiting, remember this. Sometimes the journeys we fear the most, the ones begun in silence and doubt, lead us to the only home our hearts were meant to know. And sometimes all it takes is a single, trembling sentence: "You're coming with me," to change the course of two lives forever.